Good morning. I'm Krista Robisheaux, and this morning we're going to be talking to you just briefly about our journey using open education resources at the Southeast campus. While I was thinking about this presentation, I realized I've kind of come full circle. I actually started on this campus on the second floor of this building as a computer graphics professor roughly 10 years ago. And I didn't know it at the time, but because of the expense of our program and the materials that we required our students to purchase, it became problematic to ask them to buy textbooks because of cost, but also because the information wouldn't remain relevant throughout sometimes the semester. The technology for web design, which is what I teach, and 2D animation would change in the course of a semester. And as I would watch my students go through their work, they wouldn't be using their textbook, they'd be looking at videos on YouTube from other technology users who a lot of the time knew the software better than the textbook did. So pretty quickly into that position, I stopped requiring textbooks. And I joined my students in looking instead for materials that would supplement their learning and provide them with a real-time professional view of what was expected for their discipline. In thinking about the cost of textbooks, one of our faculty members, and we're not full screen. It won't go if we're not full screen. Yeah, make it go. There we go. One of our faculty members, as we were working on this project, found this graph. And I'm a creative, so bringing a graph to you is an interesting thing for me. This shows the price increases over a period of time of about 35 years. And the bottom line, which is brown, is the consumer price index, the cost of living on a daily basis. And it's gone up, but it's gone up at a fairly consistent rate. The real story here, though, is that gold line. The gold line is the housing price index, and there we all know that story. Around 2007, 2008, a bubble happened and exploded all over our economy. The interesting story here, though, to me, is the cost of medical services and educational textbooks. Both rose at an astronomical rate after the housing bubble. And the reason why, as we all know how this story ends, is people who were in the workforce, a lot of times who'd been in the workforce for a long period of time, needed a new credential. They needed a new degree. They needed a way to make a living because most of them, a lot of them, had lost their jobs. So the textbooks increased in cost. What we started to do at the Southeast campus was to really look at ways to combat that rising chart and to negotiate with textbook publishers. We are working on a common learning material project in tandem with our OER project. But our president didn't think that was sufficient. So in the summer of 2014, he came to Joe Klemm and to myself and asked us to put together a summer committee to really look closely at open education resources and to talk to the faculty and involve the faculty who were already using it and who were dead set against it. So we put together a committee of roughly 15 faculty members and worked that entire summer on evaluating open education resources and how they would be appropriate for our students. As a result, in fall of 2014, the faculty who continued to use open education resources or started to use saved our students roughly $120,000 just in one semester, just at one campus. Moving forward, we increased the momentum by providing professional development opportunities, by encouraging the committee that started in the summer of 2014 to collaborate with other faculty members, and really encouraging that growth in open education resources. And as a result, in the fall of 2015, this year, we tracked 34 faculty members, and they saved our students over $228,000 just this semester. That doubled. Basically, the work of that one summer committee saved our students almost $250,000. So that had a significant impact, and we suspect that it's going to grow. And the reason why it's going to grow is the legacy of the faculty committee who put these materials together built what's called a LibGuide, or a resource or a pathway for faculty who come along behind them to follow and to really learn the lessons that they've learned through this process. So in talking about best practices, the library, led by Joe Klemm, took all of the information and made it easily available for faculty to review, to collaborate, to contribute to. And I'm going to let her kind of talk that part.
One of the things as we started the committee, one of the discussions was that none of the faculty wanted to be told how to do this. They wanted to be able to use the sources that they needed that would match with their expertise to teach their classes. And so the committee developed this concept of adopting or adapting or creating material. We didn't go in and say, you have to use an OpenStax textbook. That kind of thing is happening with the common textbook. They're choosing a printed textbook in order to lower costs by purchasing the same textbook across the district. And so we're buying more textbooks, and so that's bringing the price down on the printed textbooks. But with the the OER option, we wanted to give faculty an option to find what they needed. And so we developed some different ways to help them find whether they wanted to adapt, adopt, or create. One of the first things we did was to bring one of the representatives from OpenStax up from Houston to talk to our faculty. If you're not familiar with OpenStax, it's a nonprofit organization that's grant funded, but they're housed on the Rice campus. And they, through the grant funding, have developed some peer-reviewed textbooks in several different fields. And so she presented her product just like any salesperson would, but the difference was that there's not a price on it. And so that really ignited a fire for many of the faculty who have had textbooks available. So they adopted those. One of our first adopters was the statistics instructors. The statistics textbook cost $257. And so that transfer to OpenStax was wonderful for them. But there was one chapter in the OpenStax textbook that she didn't really care for. You've probably all taught a class where there's one chapter that the writer of the textbook doesn't approach the topic the way you would. Well, in a print textbook, you can't really do much about that. With an OpenStax textbook, she could pluck that chapter out and write her own chapter and put it in there. OpenStax stores her version of the textbook on their server and gives her students a specific email address to go to it. So she adopted the OpenStax textbook, but then she was able to adapt it to what she needed. And so that's most of the open educational resources that are out there will allow you to do that. And so you're not tied down to exactly the way an author approaches a topic. We have provided, through our LibGuide that Krista mentioned, we have provided a list of places where our faculty members can go to look at places where they can adopt a complete textbook. And many of them want to do that. They want a whole package, and they just adopt that textbook. But we also have a list of places where they can change the material, or where they can pull bits and pieces and create their own material. Now, in order to do that, one of the barriers that can be out there is copyright. Even if it's for educational purposes, if you're going to use that material semester after semester, you've got some copyright issues. There's a response to that copyright question that has developed along with the open educational resources, and it's called Creative Commons. And Creative Commons is a new way to think about intellectual property. And rather than getting a copyright on a piece of material, you can put a Creative Commons license on it. And it gives people permission to use that in different ways. And you, as the creator, can choose how people can use your material. And you, as a consumer, can look at that Creative Commons license, and you'll know what the author will let you do with it, and you're not going to you're not worried about getting sued for copyright infringement. We're going to watch a short video that explains the whole Creative Commons concept.
Digital content legally? How do you let people know that you want them to reuse your own work? Creative Commons licenses can help you do both. We'll show you how. Our world's exploded with digital opportunities. Now we can communicate, share, and work together using the exceptional distribution network that is the internet. Information and content can fly between us in exciting new... Have you ever wondered how to download and share digital content legally? How do you let people know that you want them to reuse your own work? Creative Commons licenses can help you do both. We'll show you how. Our world's exploded with digital opportunities. Now we can communicate, share, and work together using the exceptional distribution network that is the internet. Information and content can fly between us in exciting new ways. But it's important to know that when something is created, say a photo, a document, or a music track, it's automatically protected by copyright. Copyright enables people to say who can share and reuse their creations. You must always obtain someone's permission before sharing or reusing their work, even when it's posted online. But what if a creator wants everyone to use their work without the hassle of granting permission over and over? This is where Creative Commons can help. Creative Commons provides licensing tools that are free to use. You can apply a license to your work, which refines your copyright and streamlines how you give permission. Zach here downloads a photo called CC Kiwi that he wants to use in his science project. He can do this without asking Kiri, the photographer, first, because she's already given permission with a Creative Commons license. Kiri's license is legally robust, but easy for Zach to understand. She's told the world, including Zach, that they can use CC Kiwi as long as they acknowledge her as the original photographer. There are more rules Kiri could have included. Creative Commons licenses are made up of license elements. You can think of them as rules, and each have their own special symbol. This is attribution. It means that Zach must acknowledge Kiri when he publishes his science project containing her photo. This is non-commercial. It means no one else but Kiri is permitted to make money from CC Kiwi. Tim wants to print the photo onto t-shirts and distribute them to friends. He can do this, but he must not sell them. This is no derivatives, and it means that Kiri hasn't given permission to change her photo. Kate can use CC Kiwi on her design blog, but will need to ask Kiri before retouching or mixing up the image. And this is share alike. It means new creations that use CC Kiwi need to carry the same license. Jack incorporates his own remix of CC Kiwi in his video installation, but he must share the work under the same terms that Kiri has. Each Creative Commons license gives permission to share and includes the attribution rule. So people who find your Creative Commons licensed work are automatically allowed to share it, but are required to acknowledge you if they do. The other 3 license elements are optional, and you can choose which ones to add, if any. Here are the 6 combinations that make up Creative Commons licenses. The difference between them is how many rules apply when someone wishes to use your work. The attribution license allows reusers the most freedom, and the attribution non-commercial no derivatives license allows the least freedom. The attribution license and the attribution share alike licenses are sometimes referred to as Free Cultural Works Approved licenses. These 3 licenses restrict commercial use of a work. And these 2 licenses do not give permission for adapting or remixing. These 2 licenses require new works to be licensed under the same terms. To choose and apply one of these licenses, and to view their terms in more detail, visit us at creativecommons.org.nz. Or you can answer some questions to help you decide which license best suits your needs at creativecommons.org/choose. There are some good ways to find other people's Creative Commons licensed work online. You can use a search filter by going to the Creative Commons website. Or why not try the Jamendo website for music, Flickr for images, or Digital NZ for New Zealand content. Using Creative Commons licenses could help your creations reach more people. Maybe you want to connect with others across the globe and take turns at improving a report. Or maybe you just want to have fun, remixing someone else's work. Whatever reason you have to share your work, you'll find there are scientists, educators, companies, and public agencies who are using Creative Commons. By opening up permission, just imagine how much we can achieve. Collaborating on what we hold in common, being open about big decisions, and finding solutions in the spaces between us. Let's work together, confidently and legally. It's good to share with Creative Commons.
I apologize that now you have to listen to my Texas accent again after that lovely New Zealand accent. It sounds a little complicated. Which license should I use? What combination of licenses? But the website they mentioned, Creative Commons/choose, walks you through a flow chart very simply and says, do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? Then these are the licenses you need to place on your material. So it makes it very simple. Now, I will say that Creative Commons is relatively new in the educational arena, and it has not really been tested legally. There have been a few cases, but what has happened is that they have realized that if there is a Creative Commons dispute, if somebody doesn't like how their licensed material is being used, it's going to be settled as a contract law rather than through copyright law. It's going to work with copyright law and be decided in contract courts. But, like I said, there have not been any just flat-out clear-cut violations that have gone to court yet. So it is relatively new. But the fact that as many people are using it as are, and that there haven't been any well-known court cases about it, that's a really good sign that people are working collaboratively and being true to what the licensing is. So Pennie is going to talk a little bit about how she has adopted, adapted, and created to build some course content for the classes she teaches.
Thank you. I know some of you are teachers and some of you are people who support teachers and help them with dealing with the technical issues, and there are, of course, those kinds of issues. I thought it was interesting that in the conclusion to Mr. Carter's talk, he had very much the same advice that we do. Start small, take your time learning little bits, start with other people's work. Don't try to start out creating your own at the beginning. Work into that. And with I'll talk from my experiences and some things that have worked and some that haven't. I teach both English and journalism, and OpenStax does not provide textbooks for our disciplines. They have focused initially on the disciplines that have the most expensive books in the sciences, and that's as it should be. But it means that in looking for possibly turnkey texts, there are fewer of those available. I actually did start small with a creative writing class. We had a textbook. It was not outrageously expensive, but anything you don't use, you're spending too much money on. And working with another creative writing teacher, we decided we would make the book optional. And the things we would use mostly were readings, and there were other readings available that we could provide to our students. I know for what I had, I could post them as documents, create a file on Blackboard, have them there, and I asked students afterwards if they liked this better, and of course they did. I was able to supplement the material with interviews with authors from NPR, websites dealing with writing, advice on technical issues from the Purdue OWL, the online writing lab that Purdue University has so graciously made as a gift to the world. So that was kind of starting small because it was not an elaborate form of textbook. As I said, I also teach journalism. I teach Introduction to Mass Communications. And like what Krista was talking about, that's a world that's changing pretty constantly. The textbook my predecessor had used came out the year before the iPad. Obviously, that was going to have missing some pretty conspicuous information relating to what was being done in the mass communications field. This was about 2 years later. So I was starting out. I hadn't taught the course before, and I did like most of us do. When you have a new course, the textbook is kind of your guide. I selected the newest textbook I could find, and it had, like many textbooks, about 15 or 16 chapters, and I kind of planned my course accordingly. And it was primarily, the first half of it was based on legacy media. And it had one chapter on new media, and I thought, well, we're not going to continue with this for very long. And then I started kind of testing materials. I ran across an online book with a Creative Commons license called Searchlights and Sunglasses, and I gave it to students in my mass comm class and said, I want you to test drive this. I want you to spend a little time reading it. I want you to try out some of the activities related to it, and I want you to write a review of the book and tell me what you think of it and how it could be used. And I had done this with some other things, but this was one that they liked because it was very interactive. It was something that they could relate to because they like it, not just to read words on a page, something where you just post a PDF, but this had links to YouTube videos. It had links to other websites. It gave them a lot of information. And several of the chapters would work with my goals as far as the course is. So at that point, I had to do what I would suggest that you all do, is look at your district syllabus or wherever you set out your requirements, and don't start with a textbook, but start with your course objectives, and then look for the materials that will support those objectives. So one of my objectives was to have time in the classroom where we talked about press freedom, about the relationship of the law and public information, and also about potential careers in mass communications. So 2 of the 5 chapters of Searchlights and Sunglasses fulfilled that function. So I needed to look for other materials related to media literacy. I needed to figure out how I was going to teach the history of mass communications, because that's still important. It's not half your course. And I found several interesting approaches that I'm using now in my classes, and the students seem to respond to. I found Poynter Institute, which provides a lot of training to practicing journalists, also is set up to accommodate students, and like to do this with free, self-guided online classes. So I assigned several of those in the course of the semester. My mass comm class is blended, so it's 51% face-to-face and 49% online. So that's part of their 49% online. And then it's like, well, what will be the best way to convey the history of mass media? And I actually created an assignment where the students are helping to provide the materials. We have a class wiki, and they have various assignments that they use in order to convey the history of mass communications, and we do class presentations and some other activities. So the students are, in essence, writing their text for the semester. It's on the class wiki, so when I say you need to know the date that Johannes Gutenberg printed the first Gutenberg Bible, you need to know the date when the first communication went across the ocean, they can go into that class wiki, get that information. And when they're involved, of course, it's much more interesting to them. And I'll tell you about another student project that is also working with OER in a minute. But all of these things come together in such a way that they fulfill the course objectives, and I'm looking for the best quality. So this has worked very well in my mass communications class. Well, this semester they asked me to teach business and technical writing, and I hadn't taught that before, but I looked at the textbook that our campus has used. We're in the common textbook cycle where next year the common textbook will be decided, and I kind of planned a course around it, but I didn't like it very well. It had some conspicuous omissions, I felt, and I thought, well, we'll just try to wing it. And I started looking. An organization called Lumen Learning had an available textbook that's open source that I could use, and on business and technical writing, and I liked some parts of that, and all of it was licensed with a CC BY, the attribution license in Creative Commons, which meant I could use any part of that book as long as I gave them credit. And that was easy enough to do, just put it in copy the pages I wanted to use, post them on Blackboard in a section called OER. I said, if you can't remember OER, just think of it as, this is the $100 textbook I'm not buying. And they got the hang of that pretty quickly. And then I found another textbook with a Creative Commons BY license from Austin Community College and used parts of that. And then I found some things in the Purdue OWL, and I found some things on Skillshare that gave them video lessons relating to typography and design. And we have looked in some other places gradually to find the right kinds of information to convey. And they're more or less test driving it for me, which is good, because this semester I have 1 section, next semester I'll have 3. So they had been working on design, and they had been working with some of the basic principles and how you direct your business and technical writing. And I said, well, I think the first project for the class next semester is going to be to design a business card, which is something they've been doing. Can y'all write instructions, which is another assignment in business and technology, on how to do this? And then we'll put together what you all do, and that'll be the OER for next spring. And they've worked, and they used illustrations and screenshots, and we had 4 different teams putting together different versions of it, and then we presented and talked about how to combine it. So essentially, when we get the combining process done, we will put a Creative Commons license on it, and we'll have another OER that we can use. And the students were involved in the process and are making it work. Talk about test driving. So that was something that we will know that should be successful in the future. On our best practices, we talk about securing department approval. Certainly your chair needs to know what you're doing. Other people need to know what you're doing. Of course, at Southeast Campus, we're tracking that because we want to know the savings. And using simple technology. Most of our students think they're very tech savvy because they can use their phone to send a text. A lot of them, if you ask them anything more elaborate, kind of look at you like, how would I know that? Because I can't do it on my phone. And so we need things that they can do on the computers. A lot of times they're using our campus computers, or they might have a laptop, but they're using our campus Wi-Fi because they don't have access to that at home. We need to accommodate a lot of different skill levels, and we need to be able to do this because for most of us, open educational resources is synonymous with online educational resources, but we need to make sure that it's available to all of our students, and Krista is going to address that.
So thinking about it from a student perspective, but also from a faculty and staff perspective, one of the stumbling blocks that we found with faculty working with OERs is really finding the platform that worked best. A lot of our faculty would want to get started, but not really know, where do I keep all this information? Do I put it in the LMS? What do I do with it? So what we recommend in our professional development sessions are really to use what you know. So if you're already comfortable using Evernote or Microsoft or Google, as we heard earlier, use those platforms to capture the information that you're curating for your course materials. And I also put up there an Apple nod. It's iBook Author. If you want that security of feeling like I have a textbook for my students and you want to work with the Apple platform, they put out a free resource to do that, to build an actual interactive textbook. But there is a difference between the platforms that you use to curate and build the information, basically to find the things online that really will work, or the things in the real world that will work for your course, and the content developers that are on the right side. SoftChalk Cloud is something that the Tarrant County District purchased a license for, so our faculty have access to that content creation system. A little different from a learning management system. Content management or content creation systems allow you to build in the interactivity and the real-world responses to your students. So our faculty, we've had some training on that to allow them the ability to utilize that resource. There are other resources out there. The ones on the right you have to pay for. Somebody has to pay for. So that goes a little bit against the hope of OER to really not increase student costs either up front or on the back side. The other piece, though, that we've utilized and we've talked about quite a bit today are LibGuides. As I mentioned, LibGuides and SoftChalk and Articulate, they are there to house the content. One of the challenges, and we'll talk more about challenges here in just a second, but one of the challenges that we found at the Southeast campus is the learning management system that we use, which is Blackboard, isn't as spry and adept as we need it to be at housing this material. Remember that the concept of OER, in addition to being cost sensitive, is that it's something that can be updated quickly and shared. And storing the content in your LMS sort of waters down that sharing component. It's not as easy to share materials using Blackboard because there has to be that sign-in component. So that's one of the challenges that we faced while looking at the technology. But really the overriding principle as you're thinking about getting started with open education resources or increasing the open education resources that you're using is to look to be simple, to keep it to something that you already know, and to be sensitive to your students and the fact that they may know a lot about texting or they may know a lot about Tumblr, but they don't necessarily respond well to some of the platforms that you have access to use. So some additional challenges.
I'm going to go off script for just a minute. I know that panics my fellow presenters. Another way, everything we've talked about has been online. But another way some of our instructors are doing an open educational resource is that we have purchased some classroom sets in the library. Our English and reading professors have been a little reluctant to go to OERs because of copyright issues, and the materials that they want their students to read are often still in copyright, and so they can't use them freely. So one way we have addressed that is to purchase some classroom sets of novels and some nonfiction too, and keep it in the library, and then the entire class is studying the same novel at the same time, and that keeps them from having to purchase the item. That's a little bit, that may go against the grain of your library director. That's a little bit radical for some of us. But what I decided is I could spend that $100, that $200 on 2 books that might circulate, or I could buy this classroom set of paperbacks that I know is going to circulate 3 or 4 times before they wear out. And so talk to your librarian about that. There may be some cases where if you can't find online content, where your library might buy a classroom set that you could use for that chapter or for that portion of the semester. So some of the challenges, we talked about the committee that we had, and as every committee does, we had a faculty member who was very anti-OERs. And so we promised him that we would include, anytime we talked about it, we'd include some of his worries and some of the challenges he sees with OERs, because they are legitimate. One of them we just mentioned is student access. You know, we talk about, oh, this is the digital generation and everybody has a computer. Well, a lot of our students at our campus do not have computers. And when you try to teach a student over the phone how to use an online, My Math Lab or one of those programs, and then you realize she's trying to do it on her phone, that she doesn't have a laptop, that comes to light. And so you need to be conscious of that as you're working on it. We've talked about the Creative Commons and copyright disputes, and that's still new, but it's really not an insurmountable challenge. It's easy to do attribution. You all know MLA or APA. You just put an attribution on it. Some of our faculty members are very concerned about the material being peer-reviewed, and that's more important, frankly, for some areas of study than others. If it's very, very important that you use a peer-reviewed source, you probably are going to want to go with OpenStax or Lumen Learning, some group that is writing the textbook, because they are being very careful about getting peer reviews, and you know who the reviewers are. And with OpenStax, you can even talk to them and ask to see reviewer notes. They're very open about their process. cost is something your institution is going to have to decide about an OER. The rule for TCC is that if you are not going to use the standard textbook, the chosen textbook, and you're going to go with an OER, it has to be completely and totally free. It means students can't pay $15 for it. It has to be totally free. Now, we have expanded that a little bit, that if they want a printed copy of the textbook, they can pay for that. But the online version of the textbook has to be free to them. With some of the providers, like OpenStax, the online version is free. The printed version, you have to pay printing costs. So you could get that $250 statistics textbook for $30 if you really needed a print copy of it. The relevance is something that you're going to deal with, whether it's a print textbook or an OER. You're going to review the material, and you're going to know whether or not the material is relevant to your objectives. And you and your department head, faculties are going to have to work that out together. Same with the quality. You have to make those decisions about print sources anyway. And the coordination and collaboration comes in with some of the larger institutions that have multiple campuses or that have many, many sections in a department. It's helpful if the faculty works together and collaborates so that students, you know that students are getting the same objectives no matter what the material being used is. But none of those challenges are insurmountable. And this statistics professor, at the end of the first semester she taught with it, I said, so, you know, was it worth it? Was it just a horrible amount of work transferring to this OER? And her response was, it was no harder than changing textbooks. When I change to a new textbook, I have to relearn it and adjust and change my my lesson plans to adjust to the new textbook. And she said it took some time, but it would have been the same if I'd been using a print source. Now, one thing that some of our faculty do have a huge problem with is that there are not supplemental materials with most OERs. There are not test banks. You can't put the tests into Blackboard and have them graded and the grades come out. And that's a big hump to overcome. But I think that the longer OERs are used, people will share their tests, and there will be test banks out there. And so that's something that may fix itself as we go on. Do y'all have other comments? Oh. Do y'all have questions?
On the cost restriction that's internal to TCC, that if you adopt the OER, it has to be free, does that apply to additional resources that may be available? As a math professor in particular, I'm thinking about WebAssign that does come with some of the, as an option for some of the OpenStax books.
Yes, it has to be free. Now, I assume, and y'all chime in if this is different, I assume that if a dean wanted to purchase those supplemental materials out of his budget, that would be okay, but it has to be completely free to the student. So none of those costs could be passed on to the student.
In the very intro, you guys touched on savings. How did that get figured out?
I took the cost of the textbook in the bookstore and multiplied it, and I'll be honest, I did take the new cost. I did not figure in if they bought a used text, but if they bought the text new, and I multiplied it by the number of students that each professor had, and it came to that.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So basically, I'm a big fan of open source everything, and I'm just curious to, but I'm also a little fearful on the classroom side of things. So I'm just curious to what pushback, if any, you've had from publishers, the bookstore, other entities that's a revenue source, right? And I'm just curious to, have you had any pushback, and how have you dealt with that?
We've had a little pushback. Because our campus president is the one who started this initiative and who is pushing this initiative, he's the one who's had to deal with the pushback. But I will tell you, I'm more careful when I go in the bookstore to buy books to put on reserve. I'm a little more careful about that. There has been a little pushback. And partly it's because if a faculty member is doing an OER and not buying that textbook, this price that they've negotiated with the textbook publishers because of volume, they're not going to be getting that volume, so the publisher is going to raise the price of the textbook next time. So it's, it's legitimate pushback. But it hasn't been anything that, it hasn't come to a head, and the Board of Trustees approved the policy that OERs are available, that you can use an OER instead of the chosen textbook.
You mentioned you had a faculty member who was vociferously opposed to OERs. Were his or her concerns completely covered in your challenges, or were there other things that that faculty member was concerned about? Or was the faculty member just being reactionary?
His concern, he's on the side of the common learning material, so the collective bargaining. His chief concern was that if we had OERs, as Joe just mentioned, pulling away from the volume that we were requesting from publishers to get a break, that then the students in the courses who were selecting the common textbook would be penalized by paying a higher cost. That was, I believe, one of his chief concerns. And then the secondary concern was the test bank, the supplemental information. He teaches a large volume of students. He's a history faculty member. So those test banks are very important to what he does. So he was really looking for an answer to that question as well.